Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to come from the 9th chapter in the first book of Kings. Here, and we read of the beginning of Solomon's post-temple construction rule. So in the first 8 chapters, the temple is built, and that is the thing he was born to do and the task he had inherited from his father, who longed to do it. And he has a second experience of a lifetime where he's visited via a dream by God himself. And so we have to take it back to the first time. The first time was when he was 19 years old. This is when he had secured his claim on the throne. He was firmly seated. His rivals, no, not the threat they once were. And he gives a sacrifice of a substantial amount of animals at Gibeon, which is the Jerusalem's predecessor as the site of the tabernacle, because before the temple there was the tabernacle, and Solomon, it took him 24 years to build it, not 24 consecutive, but in the 24th year of his reign he had completed it. This takes us to around the year 946 BM, before Messiah. But in his original dream, he asks for the wisdom. He's given a blank slate to have any request he wants or desires in the dream when he's visited at Gibeon. And Solomon asks for the wisdom, and this so pleases him that he promises him unprecedented wealth and wisdom, and but he also had the conditional one, the long life, if he remained obedient. And that it was what the juxt of this message is so far. He kind of tells him, he reminds him of the possibility that in spite of having completed this monumental work, he can stray from the integrity of walk that his father walked in, and eventually he does in the 11th chapter. So a lot happens in the between the 9th and the 10th and the 11th, because Solomon reigned for 40 years. And so the opening verse reads, "And it came to be, when Solomon had finished building the house of Yahweh and the house of the king, and all the will of and all the desire of Solomon, which he was pleased to do." So he had completed the 2 principal architectural tasks. These were his own house, to have his own magnificence and glamour and prestige reflected, and also, more importantly, the house of Yahweh. So that is placed first, and it's the 24th year of his reign, and much of his reign is devoted to, it's a whole process to build this thing. So there's a whole trade network to get the supplies to gild it and to build it. And there's this whole network that stretches across not only Israel, but the surrounding nations. That Yahweh appeared to Solomon the second time, as he had appeared to him at Gibeon. Now in Gibeon, this we read of in the 3rd chapter, where Solomon is visited in a dream after offering sacrifices. And so much of what we read in the 8th chapter is that he offers a prayer. And as we read, this prayer is going to be heard and accepted and granted for the future. But then he sort of turns it and reminds him of his responsibility to keep on the straight and narrow that he had walked thus far. "And Yahweh said to him, I have heard your prayer and your supplication that you have made before me. I have sanctified this house which you have built to my name there forever, and my eyes and my heart shall always be there." So this temple, he's sealing his authority with the stamp of the seal of his own authority. He's consenting to their wishes that it would be the center of his presence on the earth, at least until it stood. And so he would always be the apple of his eye, the place where they met him. And of course, gradually robbers and thieves set up shop in the temple, and more than a few idols passed through there. But on the whole, the temple was the center of Jewish religious life from 946 BM all the way till 586 BM. Then it was destroyed, then constructed under a little before Ezra. This is the prophecies of Haggai and Zechariah. So in the year 515, the temple is rededicated, and it's complete in 20, and it lasts until 70 AD when the Romans destroy it because of a zealot. The zealots were the violent patriot revolutionaries who took it upon themselves to stir up a subjected nation of Judah against the full might of the Roman Empire, and it was crushed, and so is their temple and their city, and largely, they were. And you, if you walk before me as your father David walked, in integrity of heart and in uprightness to do according to all that I have commanded you, if you shall keep my laws and my judgments, then I shall esteem the throne of your reign over Israel forever, as I promised David your father, saying, there is not to cease a man of yours on the throne of Israel. So this, we combine the verses because they combine as one sentence, and so that's the way we like to dissect these prayers. We've done one earlier from the preceding chapter, some range in the 8th chapter, Solomon's dedicatory prayer in the search engine. But anyways, David is the model monarch. He paved the path that allowed Solomon to expand the kingdom and build the temple, things he was born to do. And he really owed it all to his father, who was a man after God's own heart. Even though he sinned and fell, he did repent and was restored. But he had an integrity of heart. Integrity is a quality that Satan can never take away unless you let him. Faith and integrity, those are the two things he can never lay hold of, except if we surrender them. And just a willingness and a heart and a mind that's inclined and oriented towards obedience of the laws and the judgments. And then he's reminding him of the promise that he had gave his father David in the Davidic covenant, a dynasty in perpetuity. So it had a double meaning. It had the according to the Old Covenant, the kings were as subject to the law as the ordinary people, so only as long as the kings observed, obeyed, embodied, and exemplified the law would they have a throne in Jerusalem. And he was patient and long-suffering with them. The quality of kings was, on the whole, mediocre from Solomon to Zedekiah. But the more enduring double prophecy points to the Messiah, the new covenant, who is his king seated at the right hand of the Father, and his descendant in our Messiah and Savior. If you at all turn back, you or your sons, from following me, and do not keep my commands, my laws which I have put before you, but shall go and serve other mighty ones, and bow yourselves to them, then I shall cut off Israel from the face of the land which I have given them, and send them away from my presence to this house which I have sanctified for my name. And Israel shall be a proverb and a mockery among the peoples. So we're going to digest it from the top, or break it down rather. So if you all turn back, so he's acknowledging that at this moment in time he is in good standing, he is acceptable in the sight, in the presence of his Maker, but the potentiality to repent in reverse of the straight and narrow and in path of integrity and faith that he is on. Whether it's him or his sons or any of his successors, they are, as Israel's kings, and Judah is the line which survives of Solomon's, they would have to enforce the law and also obey it and observe it. They were commanded in the 17th chapter of the Deuteronomy to carry a portable Torah on them because they were to live by it. And the proverb and mockery, this is covenantal cursing, of which you read of in Deuteronomy 18:37 or somewhere thereabouts. To become a proverb and a mockery, that means you're going to be a figure of fun and ridicule. You're going to have nothing to claim, nothing worth having, because you're going to be uprooted and displaced from this land and this temple, which will be destroyed when you are uprooted. And it does eventually happen. And this house which has been exalted, everyone who passes by it shall be astonished and hiss, and say, why has Yahweh done this to this land and to this house? So they're going to question why Yahweh would allow his his earthly symbolism of his grandeur to diminish, but the fact is that he is eternally radiant and he is eternally alive and powerful. So it doesn't mean that he is weakened. It's just that his power is weakened for his chosen people, because the temple that they had built that unto him lay in the dust and ruins, and they are a subjected people by this point. Then they shall say, because they have forsaken Yahweh their Elohim, who brought their fathers out of the land of Egypt, and embraced other mighty ones, and bowed themselves to them, and served them. That is why Yahweh has brought all this evil upon them. So they will know the answer without having to be told. They would be familiar with the covenantal outlines, which promised them to be that they would be uprooted and discarded and enslaved and subjugated in a land away from the land which they had inherited, the land which was promised to Abraham and his descendants through Isaac and Jacob. But the idolatry was their constant temptation, because they were surrounded by these nations in the adjacent territory who all bow down before idolatrous edifices. And so it had a certain seductive temptation and lure that plagued the nation of Israel throughout its history. And it shall come to pass at the end of 20 years that Solomon had built the two houses, the house of Yahweh and the house of the king. So Yahweh's message to Solomon is concluded. The quotation marks end. So this marks a turning point in the narrative. So let's summarize the message that Yahweh had told him in his second visible manifestation in a dream. Although we don't read of any visible elements, we do read that he appeared. The Hebrew original does entail a distinctly visual connotation to that word, or entailment, but the we're just gonna open with the 10th verse. And it came to be at the 11th verse, Hiram the king of Zor of Phoenicia had supplied Solomon with cedar and cypress and gold, as much as he desired. Then King Solomon gave Hiram 20 cities in the land of Galilee. So this, humanly speaking, the construction of the temple and his palace could not happen without the collaboration of this human king to the north, the one whom his father had been on friendly terms, the one whom it was strategically necessary for Solomon to perpetuate the alliance. But here he's being less than faithful or reliable as an ally, because he's assuming a debt from this king to the north, and he's using collateral land that is not his to give away, because it remains Yahweh's land. That's not Solomon's to give away, and he does recover the collateral, but it's still Hiram, as we read, ascribes them as worthless. So he is not thrilled to receive such collateral. We can imagine his disappointment was alleviated upon receiving the debt. And Hiram came from Zor to see the cities where Solomon had given him, but they were not right in his eyes. And he said, What are these cities that you have given me, my brother? And he called them the land of Kabul, as they are to this day. So Kabul translates as useless or worthless. So he did not esteem highly the gifts that Solomon had given him. In fact, he almost considered them an insult, and he designated a term of derision unto it himself. If the customer is always right, then this business transaction cannot go through. But Solomon does satisfy the debt eventually. And Hiram sent the king 120 kickers of gold. So this wouldn't have been a gift, it would have been a loan, we can imagine. So without this man, he could have never completed his temple or his palace. And this is the purpose of the compulsory labor which King Solomon raised, to build the house of Yahweh, and his own house, and Milo, and the walls of Jerusalem, and Hazar, and Megiddo, and Gazar. So all of these building projects were necessary, and they were for a purpose, but the exigency of the need forced Solomon to rely on compulsive labor, that means involuntary servitude, to build these projects and to get the so the temple would have been a monumental architectural task, as would have been the palace, and the Milo and Hazar and Megiddo and Gazar were all strategically significant cities that needed to be fortified in order to protect the trade routes or secure Israel at a military outpost. Pharaoh, king of Egypt, had gone up and taken Gazar and burned it with fire, and had slain the Canaanites who dwelled in the city, and had given it as a payment for the bride to his daughter, Solomon's wife. So Solomon's original wife, of whom we read, is the daughter of Pharaoh. We read of her in the opening verse of the 3rd chapter. Egypt was a land to the south, which would have had the strategically necessary alliance for Solomon to cultivate, because they were a force to be reckoned with. Why make them an enemy when you can make them your friend? And he proved his friendship by sacking this town and murdering the Canaanite inhabitants and giving it to Solomon as a wedding gift along with his daughter. And Solomon built Gazar and lower Beth Horon and Baalath and Tamar in the wilderness in the land of Judah, and all the storage cities that Solomon had, and cities for his chariots, and cities for his cavalry, and whatever Solomon desired to build in Jerusalem and in Lebanon, and in all the land of his rule. So Solomon's name is derived from the Hebrew word shalom, which translates as peace, but he ruled by peace through strength. So the military protection, he had chariots throughout his kingdom. They had storage rooms to get them in case any nation should attack. So they were not so peace-oriented. They did not exclude the preparation or possibility of war. And these building projects, they were all perhaps necessary, but he may have been extreme in his approach to it. All the peoples who were left of the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, who were not the children of Israel. So these are people, these are some of the nations kind of within the nation of Israel. So the Amorites were always around. The Hittites hailed originally from Asia Minor. The Jebusites were the aboriginal inhabitants of Jerusalem, and so they were not of Abrahamic stock or ethnically connected to the covenant community. And so they were up, as far as Solomon saw, these were the ones with whom he could conscript for labor, and the Mosaic law observed no distinction between the law of the stranger and the an inhabitant in their community, native inhabitant. And so by that, we're just gonna move on. Their descendants who were left in the land and after them, whom the children of Israel had not been able to destroy completely, from these Solomon raised compulsory labor, as it is to this day. So these were the people that the conquering generation had been commanded to eliminate wholesale, but that just wasn't realistically possible for them to do. So they had to live with some of these lingering remnant leftovers of the people they had kind of displaced, and these were fair game in Solomon's calculation for the compulsory labor to get these monumental building tasks done as efficiently and as economically as possible. But Solomon did not make slaves of the children of Israel, because there were men of battle, and his servants, and his rulers, and his officers, and commanders of his chariots, and his cavalry. So we learn of a native outsider stratification of employment. So he employs his own people, that being the Hebrew people, in his military and as his servants and his judges and just enforcers and military generals. So these are the jobs which are reserved for his own people, and while those who are not of his own people are subjected to, we read, slavery. These were the chiefs of the officials who were over the work of Solomon, 550 who ruled over the people who did the work. So we understand that his kingdom and his network, his international network, employed some 450 people to oversee it. He had extensive commercial contacts with regions as far as Sheba in Africa and Elam in India and really Greece and Europe. So all over the place, he had extensive commercial contacts. So even though the land he ruled was minuscule, he in fact wielded tremendous influence over the region which surrounded him. And the daughter of Pharaoh came up from the city of David to her house that he had built for her. Then he built Millo. So what he does for the Pharaoh's daughter is altogether different than what he does for the daughters of the queens he marries, the wives of. So they the strategic element kind of marriage and selection kind of overextends itself as Solomon indulges excessively in the world and empire and just the pursuit of power, prestige, and influence. And 3 times a year Solomon brought burnt offerings and peace offerings on the altar which he had built for Yahweh, and he burnt incense with that which was before Yahweh, thus giving fullness to the house. So he did not leave the temple idle. It was a place of activity where these sacrifices were altered, and we do read that the original theophanic manifestation in the form of a dream in which he visited Solomon came in response to sacrifices. That's also how he kind of ends after the prayer, after the offering in the previous chapter. And King Solomon built a fleet of ships at Etzon-Geber, which is near Elioth, on the shore of the Sea of Reeds, in the land of Edom. Edom is the territory of the Edomites, or the descendants of Esau, who was the older twin brother of Jacob, through whom the 12 tribes of Israel sprang. And so, but Solomon had a stake in their claim in the Sea of Reeds. That would have been the Dead Sea. So the land of Edom would have been around it. They would have shared that. That would have been their border between them. And Hiram sent his servants with the fleet, seamen who knew the sea, to work with the servants of Solomon. So Solomon would not be Solomon, or at least as exalted and esteemed and as he was, if it were not for the loyal assistance of this ally by the name King Hiram. It's from him that he got the cedars to even build his palace and the temple, and just got the gold to finance it all. So he kind of sold him short earlier when we read that he tried to trade him off as collateral 20 lands which really belonged to Yahweh and are not the king's or anyone else's to give, which were in any case rejected. And they went to Ophir and took 420 kikers of gold from there and brought it to King Solomon. So he's going out of his way to get the gold to replete his own coffers and to establish his credit. So we do want to acknowledge the extent to which Solomon was dependent and reliant and had benefited from this King Hiram. But that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.